Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of Super Switch Headz, the premier Nintendo podcast on all of the internet. My name is David Howe.
My name is Patrick Nisley.
My name is Jordan Willis.
Oh boy, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest joining us on this very special episode. Let's welcome for the first time to the show, Mr. Jon Cartwright. How's it going?
Thank you so much. I'm just in a room of, I guess, 3-4 beautiful people.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you're watching the YouTube version because we're all looking super hot today. But we've got you on, Jon, and you might know Jon from Good Vibes Gaming, one of the great YouTube gaming channels out there right now. And we've got you on this week because we are going to be talking all about Tetris, the ecstasy and order of the Tetris franchise. One, I think, of kind of the pantheon pillars of gaming franchises out there. There's a lot of great stuff coming out very soon with Tetris. Upcoming, we have a brand new Atari 50 style Tetris retrospective interactive documentary that I'm very excited to play. That's coming out to all platforms. Arika, the creators of Tetris 99 and Tetris the Grandmaster, have a brand new Tetris the Grandmaster game coming to Switch sometime, I think early next year. We've got some Tetris 99 events happening. There was a movie just about Tetris, so we figured now is a really great time to talk about what it is that makes this franchise so good, some of the best Tetris games that you can play on Switch, some of the history of the franchise, and more. Very excited to get into this with y'all. Tetris is a personal love of mine, so I can't wait to just gush on this franchise with you for about an hour. But before we get into that, how's everybody doing? Are we having a pretty good week? We're in the realm right now where we're doing special episodes. We're not sure exactly where this is dropping, but temperature in the room. How are we all doing right now?
Dude, after being like unemployed and my phone not ringing, my phone overfloweth with work, and now I'm like juggling 3 different things, and I'm like, it's like I couldn't say no to any of them, and I'm like, oh shit, but at least like some of them have more like malleable timelines. But picked up another gig pretty recently, so starting that this week, and then I'm actually editing the movie that I shot, so I'm working on that. I think I've talked to you about a little bit about it, David, but so the director was having a tough time, and he said, hey, you want to take a crack at it? And so I'm about 12 scenes in, and I think I'm going to just keep going until it's done and see where we're at, but
hell
yeah, so pretty good. So from being not busy to being really busy is a weird change, but yeah.
I feel you.
I'm doing okay. I had a little bit of a stomach bug, but I'm doing better and okay now. And I'm just, I guess this kind of dates when this is coming out, or when we recorded this rather, but I'm in the throes of Steam Next Fest, which is happening right now on the developer side of it, as my game Monochrome Heights got a new demo out, and I'm just like, I don't know if I'm doing well or not. I'm just watching the numbers and trying to email people and it's exciting and scary and cool all at the same time. But that's really dominating my my day right now. But I'm pretty good now that I'm past feeling ill.
Yeah, that's great. How are you doing, Jon?
I'm doing good. I'm well rested for the first time in around 4 years. So my wife and I went to Egypt together. And that's our first time away without any kids. And with our first kid, like, she started to sleep pretty well just as we had our second kid. And he's a disaster sleeping wise. So I've literally not had a full night's sleep in I don't know how long.
I'm so sorry.
Just being able to wake up after 7 a.m. was the best thing in the world. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I'm feeling pretty good right now.
Enjoy it. Yeah, I only have one kid, and he was a horrible sleeper, and that might be why I only have one kid.
I'm sure the next one will be perfect, Patrick.
We're not having it. It's too late.
Yeah, capping it at 1. Very good. I'm doing pretty good. Hopefully, if all is going well, I am currently somewhere in Japan, ideally at the Nintendo Museum, which I did get a ticket for, so I'm very excited. And hopefully I'm not editing the show while I am on vacation and this is pre-recorded, but I'm very excited to talk more about that stuff whenever we get back. Very, very pumped. I don't know how much they're going to let me like film in there, or even if I need to. We'll just mooch off of other YouTubers' videos and talk about it on the podcast. I think that should be fun. But yeah, no, I'm doing all right as well. Very happy to get into this today.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that brings us to our topic on this special episode, which is Tetris. It's a big one. There's a lot of Tetris games and a lot of Tetris history and all that. But I thought we could maybe just kind of big picture talk about Tetris. David, you kind of already mentioned a lot of the stuff that's kind of going on with Tetris and the zeitgeist, Tetris Forever, and all those different things. You know, Tetris is such a big video game. It's like the first big, at least popular puzzle game, right? Ever. It's still a big game. There's still iterations coming out. I know, like me personally, I have a lot of memories and fondness for the Game Boy version of Tetris. That's where like I have memories. I think I've said this on the podcast before, but like of being at my older brother's soccer games, just on the sidelines playing Game Boy and Tetris on the Game Boy and stuff like that. Like very visceral sense memories of that. But like, what about everybody? Like, what are your thoughts about Tetris as a whole, and like maybe some feelings and memories and that sort of thing?
Well, I got into Tetris from my mum, and it wasn't an official version, I'm pretty sure. It was just something that was crammed into a calculator with like 10 included games. It was like Snake, and I don't know what the other ones were, but Tetris was the one that we played the most. And I loved it there. And I went on to play it on the Game Boy after that. And from there on, I just spiraled on. But I guess I didn't really get into like competitive Tetris until the Switch era, really. It was Puyo Puyo Tetris 1 that really got me playing in a different way, like just not a casual way, like just playing against other people and learning like T-spins and all that. It's a game that you can play in so many different ways, that you can just stack blocks and clear them endlessly, or you can try and go for a high score, or you can try and make all these different moves. I think that's just kind of what keeps it alive all this time. Like anyone can play Tetris, regardless of your skill level or age. And you get kids born 6 years ago who can play Tetris. You get people who are born 40 years ago who can play Tetris. It's a ever-living game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the best things about it is you can sort of play it any way you want. And I think the two kind of essential Tetris games out right now are like Tetris 99, at least for my money, is Tetris 99 and Tetris Effect. And those are about as diametrically opposed gameplay experiences as you can have while maintaining the same exact game between both of them. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, right? And I love both for different reasons, obviously. But I think memories for me with Tetris, it was definitely, it was the pack-in game for the Game Boy, right? I think the first time I ever played it was on one of those giant Game Boys in like a Toys R Us. They had the kind of kiosks that looked like a giant Game Boy, and you're playing it on there, and I was just blown away. I think I was just blown away by the box art of like the kind of the blocks like flying at your face. There was a lot of flying at your face in the Game Boy era of box arts, including the Game Boy box itself. But my uncle Rich, who is actually from Wales, recently passed away, sadly. I think one of my core memories of Tetris is watching him play the game, because I was a big gamer and I loved my Game Boy, and I brought it on a family trip when we went to Wales, and just watching him set the Game Boy down flat on the table and play Tetris with his two index fingers, and just he got completely sucked in, and he played it for hours and hours and hours. And I actually didn't get my Game Boy back until I left from the end of that trip. And I assume he bought one after that, but maybe that was his only brush in with the game. But he absolutely loved it. That was really amazing. And then as well, I think when I think about competitive Tetris, and I thought of this when you brought this up, John, was, I don't know if you guys ever played Tetris with Friends, I believe it was called, but it was, or Tetris Friends maybe, but it was a Facebook game. And there was a while when, in the early days of Facebook, everybody was playing Farmville and everything like that. There was also an officially licensed version of Tetris where you would basically try to get high scores against your friend list. And I think that's when I first started really figuring out how to like min-max, like chaining Tetrises together, and like you said, T-spins and all clears and all this kind of stuff. And that was kind of my first real brush with like modern Tetris, which, pretty much every game now that comes out is a modern Tetris game. Tetris Forever, obviously, is going to be all classic Tetris. But those are some of my core memories when it comes to the franchise.
Yeah, I definitely started with the Game Boy as well. I think it was maybe like a stealth move by my parents to get me and my brother to stop arguing a little, because my brother's about 9 years older than me. And he's like, I don't want you in my room playing SNES with me. So like, get out, you know? And so I think, you know, my parents maybe kind of like, so they're like, hey, you know, here's your Game Boy, you know, have fun. And that was the packing game. And so I just started playing Tetris. I mean, I think it speaks to the, like, Tetris is just infinitely playable by like all generations. It just bridges so many gaps, like the older generation, younger generation. And as it just continues on, like just younger and younger folks are still playing Tetris. It's just the power of it. But the other memory I really have is like, I've always mostly played Tetris mobily. And so I really, really enjoy the DS version of Tetris. Like that was when I was in high school. I played that one a ton because it had all the like Nintendo tie-ins. So for me as like a Nintendo fan, I was like, every time you clear a certain amount of levels, you go on to the next game. I was always like, what's going to be the next game? What's going to be the next one? You know? So I really love that version and played that one quite a bit. I still have a copy of it today. I had lost the cart, but I had the box, and then I had to buy another cart to replace it. So I'm like, I have it for sure. And then also just like every phone I've ever gotten since I was in high school, then I got my first cell phone, has to have a copy of Tetris. Every single one. It's just like an essential. It's like, you know, Nokia used to come with the snake or whatever, but like every phone I own has to have a copy of Tetris on it. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe we could talk just a little bit about what we were all kind of hinting at there. And this is that sort of addictive, like long-termness of the core gameplay. Because ultimately it's a really simple game, right? I don't think we have to explain it to anybody. I think most of our listeners know what Tetris is, but you know.
Yeah. I'm curious if there's anyone who doesn't know what Tetris is, you know, like I'm sure.
So I know one person. I can't give specifics because of the company they work at, but at a game company, there was one person there in the higher up management who legitimately had not heard of Tetris, and I'm not sure how that's possible because this is a big game company,
right?
But
well,
yeah, they do exist.
That's funny. Well, I think just like we'll say then blocks fall down, you put them in place and you clear lines, right? When you get a full horizontal line of blocks. But
make sure you pass this episode to that person, John, so they can learn that. Yeah.
But like, what is it about that simplicity that allows it to sustain itself for, you know, whatever we're approaching here of 40 years almost? So is it the fact that because it's so simple, everybody can play it? Or is it, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is like, you know, you think about things with like low barrier of entry, but high skill ceiling, right? Is it fall into that for y'all, or any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like a wonderful blend of kind of meditative and relaxing, and then slowly ratcheting up the intensity as you go on this kind of beautiful curve, right? And I think, you know, there's also something very much to, like, there's a whole subreddit of like mildly satisfying, you know, when things fit into their right places, our brains just kind of get tickled, right? And I think, you know, that's the term Tetrising or you know, like packing your car just right. People refer to as like, you know, Tetris or something like that, right? And so I think it's kind of gone a little bit beyond. I think when Alexei Pajitnov I don't even want to say created Tetris. I'm going to say found Tetris. You know,
it existed out there.
Yeah. Pulled it out of the ether and put it onto a computer. You know, I think that was kind of like hitting at something very innate within us, and like pattern recognition and kind of the simplicity of like the number of blocks as well. It's not too many different combinations. I think there were even more blocks when he first started, and he kind of whittled it all down just to a core few, right? And I think that for me, that kind of just like, it's like almost like a gut emotional feeling, like whenever you like clear a block. And I'm getting already a little mystical about this, and I'm probably going a little further than I probably should, but it does almost feel like it kind of surpasses just like game feel to me. There's kind of something a little bit more special about Tetris, and I'm kind of hoping to get to the bottom of that this episode.
Yeah, a lot of it's improv too, I'd say. Like, you never quite know what's going to happen. You're just working on the fly. Like, you can be good at Tetris, but you can never really master it because you don't know what block is going to mix with what. Like, you never know quite what's coming up next. Modern Tetris gives you a bit more. Like, it tells you what blocks are coming up, like the next 5 or so. But especially with Game Boy Tetris, whatever comes up. You've got to deal with it. You can't hold it. You've got to put it down. So just being able to work on the fly like that makes every game feel different. And even to this day, like we've all probably played Tetris for who knows how many hours, but it still feels fresh.
Yeah, I think something about Tetris just like taps into the innate human nature of a desire to put things in order. And, it will never not be there. I think it's just like essential to what a human is. So it's very hard for games to kind of pull that out. And I feel like we're even seeing the effects of that, the Tetris effects of that today, of like with roguelikes. I mean, like Tetris is essentially a roguelike because you're always just like, okay, just one more game. I can do better next time. Just one more
Fellas, is Tetris a roguelike? I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also love the kind of lasting effect of it. And something that I love recently is this like resurgence of classic Tetris, right? Because like there is kind of a distinction between modern Tetris and classic Tetris. I think one of the big distinctions in modern Tetris, when you kind of hit the ground, you still have a little bit of wiggle room to move your piece before it's locked in. I feel like classic Tetris, as soon as you hit the bottom, it's there, right? There's also the hold mechanic that lets you hold a piece and swap it out. And then I think really one of the biggest like under the hood differences between kind of classic Tetris and modern Tetris is modern Tetris, the RNG isn't truly random, right? Like I think I forget what it was. I looked up the stats at one point, but there's always going to be X number of tiles maximum before you can get another straight piece in modern Tetris, right? When you go back and play Game Boy Tetris or Tetris for the NES, which kind of now is referred to kind of colloquially as classic Tetris, that is truly random, and you can go 300 lines without getting a line, right? Like that's not very probable, obviously, but technically it is possible to do that. And I've seen some historic runs on YouTube in watching some history of Tetris World Records videos where you see like really long droughts without getting a line, right? But what I love is that ever since there was a documentary that came out called Ecstasy of Order, the Tetris Masters. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that's definitely one of my favorite documentaries just generally, but definitely one of my favorite gaming documentaries. And that kind of was about classic Tetris tournaments, right? And it was kind of the early days of it. And ever since then, the classic Tetris scene, especially in the era of streaming, has really grown and grown and grown. And now it's like you see all the new people that are playing it are like super young. It's like you've got, I think it was a Blue Scooty who was the first one to like quote unquote beat Tetris. And even this guy recently, you have it here in the notes, who did the kind of like rebirth for the first time that had never happened. He's also very young. And I just love going on Twitch and watching these Tetris tournaments because, it's, like you said, it's a 40-year-old game for the NES, but everybody is finding new things in it. They're rejuvenated by it. And it kind of shows like, even without all the modern touches, this game can be incredibly competitive and really bring something out of people. And I just love the lasting power of it.
Maybe we should dig into a little bit of that multiplayer / competitive, because it can be competitive in other ways than multiplayer, right? Like kind of these records being broken and things like that. But I always think it's funny to think about, because I think about like Tetris 99 and Tetris Effect Connected as being like multiplayer Tetris, but it's been in it since the Game Boy, right? I don't know. Like you could get the link cable and play against your friends. I don't think I ever did that. I don't think I ever experienced that personally.
I very much recommend it. I did actually recently play a little bit of Game Boy Tetris on NSO online with a friend, and it is so fun, and it's weird. You like you have like Mario and Luigi.
Yeah, Mario and Luigi.
Yeah, exactly. Mario's kind of got a weird render as well. He's got a bit of he's got a bit of a bulge on that guy. I was like, what's going on with the Tetris creators back in the day? Why were they drawing Mario like this? But it's very, very fun, and it feels very modern too, because you can kind of see on the side like how high your opponent's blocks are, and you can kind of plan accordingly as it's going. Have you played that at all, John, like kind of in the modern era?
Yeah, so when growing up, I played Game Boy Tetris pretty much on my own. I only really ever linked my Game Boy for Pokemon. But with NSO, like you, I've been playing it a lot with friends. We actually went on this sort of dive through the Switch's Tetris games, just sort of playing them together. And yeah, the Game Boy one is just, it's so interesting because it's that side of that game that I've played a ton growing up that I've never really seen before. But it plays pretty similarly to most competitive Tetris. Like you're just sort of trying to knock the other one out with garbage. But yeah, it's something I really do recommend, especially with that weird Nintendo stuff, like Mario and Luigi just chilling out there after each round.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do y'all have a favorite multiplayer Tetris? Anybody?
Yeah, I think 99 might be my favorite. It's always intimidating to play Tetris with really good people. So playing Puyo Puyo Tetris, you've got a lot of really good Japanese players specifically, crazy good. I don't stand a chance against any of them. But with 99, there's that luck factor of taking down all those other people targeting you. And when they're targeting you, you can send more back at them. So it's kind of like you're powered up by being targeted against. And I love that dynamic. And it feels so different each round too, because you never know when you're going to get targeted. So you don't know if you're going to have to play it defensive or play it safe. And yeah, that's just a Tetris that I can never stop playing.
Absolutely. I mean, we were talking about this right before we started, but I kind of view Tetris as like the Beatles of video games in that it's like, it almost feels like rote to be like, oh, Tetris is my favorite game. You know what I mean? Because it's just like, obviously everybody knows it and everybody loves it. But I agree. I think Tetris 99 is I think far and away my favorite Tetris, and probably the one, at least in modern memory, that I can think of putting the most time into. You know, I love a lot of the 99 games. I was actually playing F-Zero 99 right before I came on here today. But, you know, Tetris 99 just has this amazing simplicity to it, and also has this wonderful like meta to it, like you said, with the targeting. And I think it's just simple enough to where you can do it while focusing on the actual Tetris gameplay. You know, it's like just kind of, you know, you have 4 categories of who you can target, right? And kind of figuring out when to do that with like a flick of the right stick takes kind of a long time to really hone your skills on exactly like when is best to do that. And sometimes you're just going to be fucked because there's some guy who is incredible at the game who's just going to run through you anyway. But honestly, most of the time, if you're smart about it, you can do pretty well at it. And I think for me, I love Tetris 99. I love streaming Tetris 99 because I think Tetris in general is a game, and this is actually something they get into in that documentary I was talking about, is a game that really highlights the kind of separation between actively thinking about something when you're playing a game and like, oh, here's the move I'm going to make next, and then kind of just letting your body take over, you know? And you get into kind of a flow state with Tetris, especially when you've been playing it for your whole life, where, you know, you kind of just know where things need to go and you kind of just let it go into autopilot and let it go. And I find sometimes when I'm streaming and I'm talking to chat and I'm kind of talking about what's going on while I'm playing, I end up playing better, right? Because I'm not letting myself get tripped up over my own thoughts or my own strategies, and I'm kind of just letting it flow. In fact, I think the very first time I ever played Tetris 99, I won first place on it. I think, granted, a lot of that was because the game had come out like literally minutes before that and nobody knew what the fuck they were doing. It was just, I let my innate Tetris ability carry me to the end. But I do think there's something to that on just kind of the flow state and kind of getting where you need to go. I don't know if you guys got that.
I play Tetris 99 best when I'm just watching like TV in the background or something. Like if there's a movie on. Like just not really thinking about it too much. That's kind of the trick to playing Tetris well.
Mm-hmm. Not every game is like that. Some games you sadly have to think about while you're playing, but Tetris kind of is not one of them.
I feel like I can get into a flow state watching somebody who's good at Tetris too. Or maybe it's not a flow state, but more just like a sense of awe. Like, honestly, I'm not very good at Tetris compared to you, David, and maybe all of you. I don't know, but like watching you stream Tetris 99 has been like eye-opening to me of like, oh my gosh, yeah, like that's just kind of fascinating to watch somebody who's really good at it as well.
Every day I have to ask myself, am I going to pivot to just being a Tetris streamer? And the answer is usually no, but I think that's secretly my dream, is to be a Tetris streamer. Maybe one day. But I think it does kind of, when we're talking about flow state, I mean, I think we could maybe, and I still do want to get into some of the history of Tetris as well, because it's a very fascinating history. I mean, we could do a whole episode on that. And I think that maybe this isn't necessarily what I want to do with this whole episode. But before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit more psychologically about Tetris, because not only does the game kind of like tickle that part of your brain, there's also like straight up a lot of scientific research done on the game. And one of those is where the game Tetris Effect kind of gets its namesake. There is like a psychological condition known as the Tetris Effect, which is sort of comes from kind of continued playing of the game. And it's where afterwards you sort of see the pieces continue to fall and your brain kind of gets trained to see them a lot. And so I think getting into that flow state while you're playing really ups that effect. And I find that really fascinating. And there's people that talk about, seeing Tetris blocks falling in the shower with the water on the walls, or while you're driving, seeing the pieces like kind of coming at you and everything like that. And I find that really fascinating. And that not only can describe the feeling of playing Tetris, but that then has gone on to describe lots of activities outside of gaming as well, that kind of persistence of vision and the persistence of like mental stuff. I find that really fascinating.
Well, yeah, so there's been, like you said, a lot of studies done on or using Tetris, and I was kind of reading about some and just big picture summaries of some in advance of this, and apparently there was one, and I think this is probably true for other things, just like you said, the Tetris effect is not limited to Tetris, it's other things that showed that your brain uses less energy as you get better at the game. And I mean, that's kind of like, oh, obviously, right? But like the fact that Tetris is the thing where people started to realize, or, there's clinical proof of this or whatever. But I just thought that was pretty cool. I mean, it's been used to been studies about quitting smoking and about all sorts of crazy stuff,
honestly, a lot of times when people experience something incredibly traumatic, it's been known to treat PTSD, Tetris, and it's actually been studied in its ways to do that. I'm not like a doctor. I'm not saying like if you're suffering from PTSD, go play Tetris, but I do see it recommended often. I think I was on the Austin subreddit recently, and they were talking about some sort of grisly crash that had happened on the highway, and a bunch of people had seen a body, and it was really traumatic for a lot of people. And it was just really funny. That's not funny, but underneath it were a lot of comments being like, "Hey, go play some Tetris right now," And it's like, honestly, it's like getting your brain hooked in on something like that. It's like distracting enough. It uses enough of your brain, but also doesn't need to use all of it. Kind of can help you navigate complex emotions and trauma and stuff like that. And I just find that fascinating that there are scientific papers written about this at all, right?
Well, I don't actually know a whole lot of the details about this, but I do know that the history of Tetris is pretty interesting because the creator was in the USSR and because there were a lot of people who wanted the rights because it started to get popular. And obviously they've made a sort of fictionalized television version of it, and there's people making documentaries and things about it. But maybe David or somebody else here who could give a quick, overview of sort of the interesting tidbits of the creator and how it got licensed and then reverted and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story. I think there's a lot of really great resources to learn about the history of Texas, but about the history of Tetris. And there's a really great gaming historian video on YouTube. I'd say that's probably one of the most succinct kind of tellings of it. Like you said, Apple TV also made a film. I was actually writing my own Tetris script based on kind of the history of Tetris. When I found out that Apple had greenlit a Tetris movie, I was like, I'll let them do it. Maybe I'll come back to it in 10 or 20 years, whenever enough time has passed. I did see that movie. I don't know. John, did you see the Tetris movie?
There were more car chases than I thought there would be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
It was good,
yeah, there were definitely good things about the Tetris movie. I think that it was a little more cheeseball than I was anticipating. And I think that there were a couple things that they sort of maybe dropped that they could have used. Like, for instance, in the story that I wanted to make, it was a lot more of kind of a buddy romance movie almost, you know what I mean? basically a real brief history was, Alexei Pajitnov was working for the USSR, as everyone in the USSR was. But essentially, he worked in kind of a computer science division. And they kind of had carte blanche to sort of just experiment with computers as they saw fit. I mean, a lot of them were working on missile tracking and financial systems for like the Soviet Union. But they could kind of work on whatever they wanted. And I think he basically came up with this game during that experimental time, whenever he's able to do that. And, basically, I think it was like a Finnish company or something. Somehow, I forget exactly how it got out there, but it was at some sort of game show when Hank Rogers, who was this American, was at the trade show, saw it, and then kind of went on this long chase in order to get the rights, in order to give it to Nintendo as they were coming out with the Game Boy. I think that was like one of the first kind of major releases of Tetris was with the launch of the Game Boy. And it's a really fascinating story about all these like giant corporations all vying for it. And then Hank Rogers himself traveling and flying to the USSR to meet Alexei Pajitnov in person, and then kind of try to negotiate with the Soviet government in order to like gain the rights. And this was kind of one of the first major kind of exports from the Soviet Union into like the capitalist West, and this was kind of one of the early kind of downfalls of the Soviet Union and kind of communism at large. It's kind of the export of this good, just made for a very interesting story. So I think that if I were to make a movie about this, it would focus a lot more on the relationship of these two guys, because it was kind of like their friendship and their loyalty to each other that sort of spoke to the government at large in order to allow this to happen and get this out there. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, Hank Rogers and Pajitnov are both the like co-founders or creator or whatever you want to say of the Tetris company, right? Who has the rights to the game now. So that friendship has endured at least financially.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And there's a lot of other stuff as well that they kind of didn't put in the movie that I think would have, that almost seemed too unrealistic to put into the movie, which is funny when you say there's a lot of car chases, John, because there's a lot of like actual thriller stuff in the movie that they didn't put in, including like a double murder suicide. One of the basically the friends of Alexei Pajitnov, like from the USSR, who was fundamental to the creation of Tetris, kind of a little bit got put to the side, especially when Hank Rogers came in, and that kind of jealousy led to these kind of grisly murders that happened after they had moved to the States. So there's a whole kind of like side plot there that they didn't really touch on in the movie. That's really fascinating if you ever want to look up some of that stuff. But it's a really fascinating history, and there's a bunch of like books. Jordan, you have a couple listed on here about some of the books you can read about the history of Tetris.
Yeah, there's like two main books that I know of. It's The Tetris Effect, The Game That Hypnotized the World by Dan Ackerman. And then there's a graphic novel called Tetris, The Games People Play by Box Brown that is a history of Tetris, but also like a meditation of like why people enjoy playing games. That one's really fascinating. I have not actually read The Tetris Effect. David, have you?
I have, yeah. And it's kind of like, it's a nonfiction kind of straight retelling of the history. I think they sort of do the thing that a lot of these books do, where they sort of fictionalize it and they put it into sort of novel form, but it's essentially what you could see by watching any of the various documentaries or the films about Tetris.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more about that, we did talk about it on episode 242, our favorite books about games.
Yeah, absolutely.
This game has obviously created a lot of sequels, as well as a lot of unofficial knockoffs and that sort of thing. I was kind of curious if anybody here, has any official or unofficial or favorites or weird iterations of Tetris that you want to mention or shout out. I came up with a small list of a few interesting ones, I thought, but even if there's better ones out there, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on those.
There's a cool one. I forget the exact title. Is it Disney's Magical Tetris?
Ooh.
It's directed by Fujibayashi, who went on to do Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. So he's the director of Zelda today. More or less started his career with Disney Tetris, and it's a pretty good version too.
Magical Tetris Challenge, the game is called.
That's it.
Yeah.
Wow. I never heard of that one.
Yeah, that's really great. Sadly, I don't think that will be in Tetris Forever, the compilation coming up. But yeah, that one's really great. You have some in here, Patrick. Did you want to say some of these that you had in the show notes?
Well, I was just doing research for the episode, and I thought some of these sounded interesting. I mean, or knew about some of them, but like Weltris, which I guess was made by Alexei Pajitnov, is sort of the sequel. I'm not very familiar with it, but my understanding is it's sort of a a change in dimension and how you look at it, or something like that. Are y'all more familiar with Weltris? It's just not something I know a lot about, and I thought that was interesting that he made that.
Yeah, I haven't played a ton of Weltris myself, but I definitely am familiar with it. The one I'm more familiar with is Hatris, which was like, I think that's the game he put out immediately afterwards, which is, it's funny because there have been so many Tetris spinoffs since then that just are basically Tetris with like a small change, and Hatris is like completely different. So you could definitely see where his mind was on being like, oh yeah, Tetris. Now I'm going to go on to make other kinds of puzzle games that are totally different. Just people didn't want that. But Hatris is a game where the blocks fall and you kind of stack hats and all this kind of stuff. And that's a really great game as well. Yeah, I really like that one.
Hatris is very different in that it's almost Dr. Mario-y, because you have two from each side coming down rather than it being like full blocks. And Pajitnov, he had a statement a few years back regretting giving the Tetris license to Panel de Pon, because it was relicensed here as Tetris Attack. And it's funny seeing how like Hatris, even though it's completely different to Tetris, was fine, but Tetris Attack was just like a step too far, even though it was very popular here. Just I guess it has like no resemblance to Tetris, so he regrets calling it that.
Yeah, that's funny. It was, it's like anything that had blocks falling from the top was Tetris for people for a long time. Yeah. And we will have you on for our Panel de Pon episode, John. We do that as well.
Tetris 2, right? At least how it was known here. I don't know if that's what it was called in everywhere, but also was kind of a change in the formula as well, and was more Dr. Mario-like, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you had Tetris and Bombliss as well. Those were... I think a lot of those Bombliss games are actually going to be in the Tetris compilation that's upcoming. A couple that you have in here that I find fascinating is for a system that only had about 14 games, the Virtual Boy had 2 Tetris games, which is very fascinating. And they're both actually really good.
Yes.
Have you played some of these, Jordan?
I had, so my grandma got me and my brother both a Virtual Boy, like when it came out, thinking it was the next big thing. None of us knew. So we did have a copy of 3D Tetris, and I remember it just absolutely blew my mind. It's one of the very few games I think that actually like works on that hardware very well, because it's like pretty simple, like polygonally, is that a word?
I think it worked.
And so it's like you're looking down and you can kind of like move it a little bit, but like the Tetris pieces are moving in a 3D plane towards, like away from you, and you have to kind of fit them in blocks like in a 3D space, and it works really well. I feel like it's close to Weltris, but I think they're like slightly different. But that's a game that I'm like actually kind of surprised hasn't gotten like some sort of a like remake on like 3DS would have been a perfect space for this game to like have a resurgence. But anyway, so I played 3D Tetris, pretty sick. I never played the other one, V Tetris. I want to say it might have been a Japanese release only.
I think that's
it was. True. Yeah. And that one's a lot more just straight up. It's just Tetris, like it's got a really nice aesthetic, and I think it's got really cool music. But that's just kind of straight up. It's like Tetris kind of floating in front of you because it's, in the virtual
when
space.
When you clear like 4 lines, it kind of pops out of the screen for a second before coming back with the V. So that's a neat effect. Also, we all just sort of glazed past you saying that you and your brother both got a Virtual Boy. I'm pretty sure that sentence has never been said before.
Yeah, I don't know, man. She was really about it. She went and like camped out and everything. I love my grandma. She's awesome, dude.
Wow.
But so we both had one. I don't know if we ever really played it together because, again, he's a little bit older, and I think he was kind of like in his teenage years, like, I don't want to hang out with my 5-year-old kid brother or something,
Yeah, that's funny. I think it makes me think about like the Switch era where Nintendo wants everyone to have a Switch. Like if everyone had a Virtual Boy, like
what kind of world would we be in right now if everyone had a Virtual Boy? I think maybe a utopia. And also, I mean, not to make this an episode about the Virtual Boy, but if you have a hacked 3DS, which at this point, why don't you? There's a great Virtual Boy emulator as well, and I think that is probably honestly the best way to play Virtual Boy games, even probably better than sticking your head in a thing and experiencing these, A, because a lot of those systems are actually broken, but B, it kind of gives you horrible nausea and headaches. But the 3D works really, really well, especially on a new 3DS. And so I definitely recommend checking out some of these Tetris games on there because they're kind of lost to time and still have aged really, really well.
This was definitely not an official Tetris game, but it's kind of burned in my memory. I feel like it happened early internet era, like around 2000 or something, but it was like Sextris, where it was like naked bodies that you moved down and put in position. And I think I was in college right around then. And so it was like definitely something that was being passed around.
Very good. That used to be the only way to do it. The only way to get off was playing Sextris with your friends. I imagine that's not an officially Tetris licensed product.
I don't think that the Tetris company had anything to do with that one.
One that I love, that I kind of think of at the same pantheon as Tetris, even though it's obviously not a Tetris game, doesn't have Tetris anywhere in the title, is Tricky Towers. Have you guys, you've played this, John?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I think I first played this in Austin. There used to be a bunch of like indie developer, like game dev meetups. And I've never been an indie developer, but I like to surround myself with them. And I would go to these parties. And one of the games that they played more than anything was Tricky Towers, and it's just such a great party game, and it's kind of inverse Tetris, right? It's like instead of trying to clear blocks, you're trying to kind of make the tallest tower that you can with all the standard Tetris pieces. And then I think one of the best things about it is that it has physics to it, right? It's not just like they lock into place whenever you drop them down. You have to be smart about where you actually put the blocks and make sure you have a wide enough base to where you can kind of continue to build up. That I think is one of my favorite games. I wish that it was an officially licensed Tetris product. I think out of all the kind of fake knockoff spinoffs, I think that is by far my favorite one, just because it kind of turns it on its head while being just as addictive to me.
It's really cool that you get the actual pieces as well, because like so many Tetris knockoffs, they try and do slightly different shapes or introduce different shapes, and it never works. It always feels weird when they try different Tetris pieces, even in like official Tetris games, like in Tetris Effect, some of those modes where they give you like those weird pieces. Like obviously it's part of the mode to work with them, but to have them as mainstays, it never feels right.
Yeah, it really puts me off. Yeah.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about what has been going on, because this year a couple records have been broken and by teenagers, like you were saying, David. And I, as somebody who's not super plugged in, and you hear like the first Rebirth or you hear the first, kill screen, I don't really fully understand always what these kids, I'm gonna call them kids, are doing, breaking all these records for the first time in old Tetris games. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see 13-year-olds playing NES Tetris, and there's the weird tapping stuff. I mean, like what can maybe a quick overview if anybody here knows about some of these, and I think it was back in April or March, and then just recently this month another thing happened.
With the kind of resurgence of classic Tetris, people have been really driven to kind of beat the game as best they can and really understand all the very minute details of how the game kind of works, how the RNG works, and kind of what the actual limits of the game are. I think you kind of have been seeing a lot more of this with kind of the rise of speedrunning, where people are really discovering what it is under the hood that actually makes these games possible and what is physically feasible, and I think you see that a lot with TAS, right? Tool assisted speedruns. People kind of like make programs in order to absolutely min-max the highest amount that you could get out of a game. And so obviously when you have a computer getting the absolute limit of what you're able to do in a game, people are then like, well, is that even possible to recreate with a physical body and brain? And it turns out, you just have to get really creative. I think one of the ways that people have been able to push past the limit of like, there's a level in NES Tetris, and when I say that, I'm referring to classic Tetris here, and that is kind of where basically the blocks start moving so quickly that just using your thumb to hit the D-pad left and right you're physically not fast enough to be able to get it to either side of the well in order to fill holes where you need to. And so there's been this method that's come up that's kind of, it's like rolling, I believe it's called, or tapping, but you have to kind of, you don't have to, but it's best if you wear a glove and you hold the controller and you kind of just keep your thumb on the direction you want to do, and then kind of tap the back of the controller and sort of use the entire controller as a big button. And you can kind of roll your fingers in order to get more inputs in as you go. And it's led to some really incredible discoveries about like what happens at the end of this game, right? You know, a lot of people know that there is a kill screen in Tetris, and that's where you both you've been playing the game for so long that the code of the game starts to get all scrambled and the colors start glitching out. And there's actually a level that you can hit that's almost entirely black. It's like because the colors start to get randomized and it's no longer, it'll just call in whatever it can based on the code base that's available. And so one of them is almost impossible to see. You have to have your brightness turned up almost all the way to even get a hint of the ghosting of what is really happening on screen. But people have been able to get past that. They've been able to hit the kill screen, which basically where the game stops running because the memory is all allocated and can't hold anymore. And then there's also the newest one that we didn't even think was possible for a long time is, the rebirth, which is where basically you kind of go past the kill screen. You go past the highest possible score that you can ever have, and the game restarts back at 1. And, theoretically, you could play forever, right? Which I would recommend against, but is technically possible. And seeing all this stuff happen right now is really amazing. And it's even been picked up by like local news channels and, it's like kind of broken past just gaming circles and stuff like that, because it is just so fascinating that 40 years later, people are still making discoveries in this game, which we all thought was very basic for so long.
It was a huge thing. Yeah, it was all over social media. My local shopping mall has like a big billboard at the start with just headlines, like just news headlines. It's usually like government stuff. But I was walking around and all of a sudden I just saw like kid beats Tetris as one of the headlines just in a shopping mall. It was wild how far that story went.
Yeah.
That kind of speaks to Tetris's popularity, or at least the awareness. Kind of like we talk about, everybody knows who Mario is, even if they don't play video games, even if they're older and never grew up with games or something, they can recognize Mario. I think Tetris is kind of the same way, right? Like those falling blocks, Tetris. I know that,
Totally. Yeah, I think Alexei Pajitnov's original dream was to have Tetris be an Olympic sport. I don't know that that's ever really fully been realized, but we talked about it a little bit We talked about it a little bit recently with the International Olympic Committee, like bringing esports into certain aspects of the Olympics. And I'd love to see that fully realized someday because, like you said, it's kind of, it's this universal language, it's like not hard to understand. It's not like, oh, what's the KD ratio on this, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, dude, it's like everybody understands Tetris and can get into it. And I think if any game has that kind of complete lasting appeal, it would be that. I'd love to see that happen.
Well, then, I mean, as we sort of head to close out this conversation, I don't know if anybody has said their favorite version of Tetris. Maybe Tetris 99 was kind of mentioned as a favorite, and we kind of talked about some of our favorite memories. But anything that we want to close out and make sure we mention about Tetris, either personally or broadly, and maybe even if anyone has any thoughts on like where can Tetris go, because it seems to still be around and people are still breaking records. So what's next for Tetris? I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that too.
I mean, the Tetris Forever makes perfect sense. Just release versions of Tetris that everyone loves and kind of mix and match them. It seems like a great idea, but I would honestly because I'm a huge fan of the Nintendo DS Tetris, I would love to see a little bit more crossovers again. I feel like in the past couple of years, they've kind of done their own original ideas. Like Tetris Effect was incredible. It's like playing through all these molded experiences for every level was like really, really cool, but it would be really cool to bring in some like iconic video game characters as well. I would love to see another Nintendo Tetris game like Tetris DS, but modern, personally.
Yeah, we've had like crossovers in the past. There was a Pokemon mini Tetris a long time ago. And I guess Tetris 99's tried to revive that with its themes. They have like Xenoblade Tetris or like Metroid Dread Tetris, and that's all cool. But I'd love to see like a full-fledged crossover game like you're saying. But in terms of like my favorite, I guess it just sort of depends on the mood. I think Tetris 99 is the easiest one to play. But Tetris Effect is something that everyone should try at least once. Just play that journey mode from beginning to end. Because it takes you on a spiritual journey that I can't even compare to any other game. The emotions you feel playing that are unparalleled. It's a magical experience. And if I'm ever like in just a down mood, I just like to play through the journey mode, and it usually makes me feel good by the end. But yeah, that's something everybody should play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird how they've somehow made it into like a spiritual experience. It's like, and it sounds corny, right? But it really is like, we've talked about like the curative powers of this game and like the emotional core, and it's got this amazing thing in Tetris Effect that we've seen before in games like Tetris Worlds and stuff like that, where it really is kind of like a journey through many different world cultures, right? And the things that can kind of bring us together as a society. And I think it's like, that's also the creation of this game was kind of like, two of like the world's biggest superpowers being at odds with each other throughout the entire length of the Cold War. And this game kind of played a major hand in sort of, tearing down those walls, like almost quite literally, like with the Berlin Wall. I mean, this was like something that happened, like it was almost less than a year before that ended up happening. And this was a huge part of it. And I think that, it being such a universal language kind of speaks to the sort of basic humanity of everybody. And it's like, we can think that we're all very different people, but our brains are all tickled by Tetris, man. It's like not that like you kind of realize like how really similar we all are. And now I'm really putting Tetris on a pedestal, but I would say, yeah, Tetris Effect is definitely one that you need to play. I think personally, I'll always go back to Game Boy Tetris. But I think, there's something completely obsessive about Tetris 99, and it is a game that somehow never gets old. If there is like one game on my Switch that I can go back to at any point, it is Tetris 99. And it's like, I honestly think that, F-Zero 99 maybe one day will go the Mario 35 route. I hope that doesn't happen, obviously. And while we're talking about it, please bring back Mario 35. I loved that game with my entire heart and body. But I kind of think Tetris 99 is here to stay, right? And I can't really see it going away anytime. It seems like anytime you play, the lobbies fill up instantly. It's obviously still so incredibly popular. And for me, I think that's the one. I did want to give a shout out to a couple weird ones that I have on my Switch that I'm excited about. One of them is Tetris Diamond. I brought this up before, but that was a Japanese only cell phone version of Tetris. And I love playing that one from time to time as well. I would definitely not say it's my favorite, but I think there's something really amazing about playing a Japanese cell phone game.
You can only get it on the Japanese eShop too, right?
That's true. I had to buy a Japanese eShop card in order to get it. That's just how big of a Tetris simp I actually am. But yeah, that one's really cool. And something that I think people should look forward to. And I think something that's going to be very exciting for the future of competitive classic Tetris is later this year, whenever Tetris Tetris Forever comes out, they're also going to be dropping the NES version of Tetris on the NSO service. And so opening that up, which has had its own resurgence just in the world, people playing on actual hardware, opening that up to everybody, I think is going to be a really great thing and something to look out for.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this special episode on Tetris. Thank you so much, Jon, for coming and joining us. Really appreciate having you here. Thanks to MilkyWay.co, who does our website. Thanks to Corduroy for doing our music. Thanks to all our patrons on Patreon. Really appreciate that. If you're looking to find me online, you can find me as PDYX.
You can find me on the internet at Bordan.
I'm pretty much ever on the internet at Monolith Fiji. And what about you, Jon? Where can people find you online?
You can find me at JonComms on most social platforms.
There you go. And also make sure you check out Good Vibes Gaming, one of the great YouTube gaming channels out there. Definitely a big fan of y'all's channel. And I just want to say again, thanks for coming on. I love your deep dives, Jon, whenever you go into something that's a little bit obscure or like for instance, what was one? The one about the arcade games that you can emulate on the Wii, stuff like that are just really great deep dives if you're ever looking for something like that. So definitely shoot Good Vibes Gaming a follow over there on YouTube. Some of the best, most in-depth stuff you can find on the platform. If you'd like to find our show on social media, we are at Switch Headz on Twitter, at Super Switch Headz on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We have a website, switchheadz.com. And like Patrick said, we have a Patreon, and we also have a Facebook group and a Discord. Please join us over there on the Discord. We'd love to have you. Such a wonderful, non-toxic community of gamers. We love you guys over there on the Discord. We'd love to have you join us in our ranks. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Give us a review on Apple and all that goodness. And we appreciate all the support there. That's going to do it on this episode on Tetris. So glad I finally got to do an episode on Tetris. I've been wanting to do this for a really long time. But make sure you tune in next week. We're going to have a very special episode for you as well. But other than that, you guys know the drill. Stay safe out there. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. I hope you guys are enjoying these special episodes. We'll be back very soon with some new ones. But in the meantime, play some Tetris 99. Get good at it. And if you're not good at that, play Tetris Effect. It doesn't matter. There's a Tetris for everybody. We love you guys very much. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.